last words, which is somewhat daunting. But first of all, before everything, I really, in my name and Moshe's name, we have to thank the organizer, the organizing committee, Kimmy and Michal, Archie, and especially Uriel, for all the work going into this conference. I said to someone that if this was the excuse that Moshe and I retired to get such a distinguished group together from all over the world to talk about the topic that we all love and respect, then I think we should retire every year.
Should have done it sooner.
We should, yes, we should have done it sooner. But that is not going to be. In his remarks on the first evening, Kimmy alluded to my rabbinical training. Don't worry, there's not going to be a sermon. And in fact, I have to say that he, in a sense, outed us as having rabbinical training. I don't think over all the years our students knew that that was part of our CV. Correct?
Correct.
No, we knew.
Oh, you? Oh, okay. A few might have known, but most of them did not.
Maybe they're only PhD students.
We are historians who speak as historians. But nevertheless, still, the Torah portion for this week almost invites speaking about retirement. Since among the verses says, Abraham Zaken, Baba Yamin, Hashem Berachet Abraham Bakol. Now the university in its wisdom or lack of such decided that I am old and that I have to retire. But I'm more interested in the second part of the verse, the Baba Yamin. They translate advanced in years, but I mean someone who's gone through a lot of days, a lot of years, and feels that at each stage there's been a blessing from God in everything. And I really feel blessed in many ways. And in a sense, the ways I feel blessed reflect the interpretations that have been given to this verse in Jewish tradition. Because one of the things, when Abraham was blessed with everything, so there's got to be something extra. What's the everything? What's the man who has everything? So he said that he had a son, that he had a daughter, that he didn't have a daughter, or that he had the wherewithal to really enjoy life, although he was lonely in his old age, as in this portion. But I too have been blessed with sons and daughters besides my biological children, of course, but sons and daughters, and that's been the students who over the years have been a challenge and an inspiration. And Moshe spoke yesterday about how the relationship between teaching and research, and I feel exactly the same, that they influence one another in many different and fruitful ways. When I started on this path as a graduate student, well, it's almost 50 years ago, believe it or not, a little bit after my bar mitzvah, if someone would have told me then that in 49 years I would be in a conference, in my honor, okay, that was the side, but if someone had told me there was going to be a conference with scholars, a large cohort of scholars of Jewish studies from Poland, among with colleagues from Israel, Canada, the United States, Germany, I would have said, not that it was fake news, but it was science fiction. Never, even more so, if someone would have told me that one of my early students in New York would one day be chief rabbi of Poland, I would have said he's totally off his rocker. But nevertheless, I've seen these things come about. The tremendous growth of the field over the years is something which I feel a real blessing, because when I began, I really felt kind of lonely and reached out to whoever I could reach out to. But it was you could have put everyone in the whole field in a third of this room, and not a lot more. I've been blessed with the opportunity to spend my days studying the things I love, and even getting paid to do it, which is also a blessing. To devote myself to scholarship. I had the support of parents, Zichronam Livracha, and my wife, of course, family. But it was kind of lonely at the beginning, because you can see a much younger me on that picture there, on the cover of the Max Meinrad Center catalog from the 1977, but that's a picture of me with a lot more hair and a lot less gray, circa 1972, killing my neck muscles and my eyes in the microfilm reader in the Evo in New York. But several people have adduced this over the time. Marcia did certainly, that I talked in a few places about the generation that knew not Poland and the Polish generation that knew not Jews, slightly younger generation that knew not Jews, a live and vibrant Jewish community in Poland. And in many ways, this was a path of discovery. This past summer, Gershon Hundert and I and our wives, and remembering our late fellow student Arnold Scribner, we spent our first visit in Poland, a summer in Poland, 1972 at the Jagiellonian University, and basically taking a Polish summer ulpan in the summer of 1972. And it was an eye-opener in many ways, and determined our path in many ways. That first exposure to Poland, it took us in many important directions in our subsequent career. But at the beginning, there wasn't this wonderful feeling of a chevra, of a group, of a school of scholars. And I really feel blessed that I've seen this and happy to have been part of it as well. If I think of my own work, and Murray talked about this, Moshe talked about this yesterday, the feeling of a kind of joy of discovery. And I'd like to just mention three areas of my own feelings of joy, of discovery, of being part of this scholarly enterprise. First of all, a book that Gershon and I wrote together in the 1980s, where we, in a sense, summed up what was in the field at that time. Today, it would be impossible to do that, because neither one of us or both of us together could really master everything that's been written. At the time, we could pretty much get our hands on just about everything and point at what was done. But just to map out the field, to make a first effort at the time of saying what has been done and what should be done, what could be done, what might be done, and we've heard more examples, thankfully, today, pointing in different directions. Among them, the lectures we heard today, several of them, pointing to the way the field can still grow even further. And I feel privileged also to have contributed my part to expanding the field, whether it be field of study of Polish Jewry, the study of Jewish Orthodoxy. I'm happy to see that my work has inspired the work of many other people, and it's flattering, of course, but it's gratifying to see how these things have grown. And if we think of another kind of summing up point, there's that massive undertaking edited by my dear friend Gershon Hundert, the Evo Encyclopedia that I also took part in. The fact that when we looked for people to write articles, we didn't have to look among 10 or 20 people around the whole world, but we could look to a pool of dozens, if not hundreds, of possible contributors. How many contributors were there on the inside?
456.
Well, that gives you an idea. Of course, it's not just Poland, it's Eastern Europe, but still it gives you an idea of how much things have grown. And again, another kind of synthesis point, looking forward to see what was going to be in the future. Another kind of joy of discovery is archives. And here, I just want to give a small example of something that actually came from the classroom. You know, you teach certain topics dozens of times. Chagit mentioned that she, in my class, that interwar Poland. Minorities treaties. How many times we go over the minorities treaties, what they say, what was the effort of Jews to get the minorities treaties, but I kept asking myself, but it didn't seem in practice that they used these treaties. They appealed to these treaties. After the first year or so, it sort of disappears from the discourse, political and otherwise. And I asked myself, how could I somehow get to another answer, another approach? And also to take my wife on a trip to Switzerland, I said, why don't I go to Geneva, to the League of Nations archive? And here, Moshe, sort of thinking, he didn't want to look for the Baal Shem Tov. I did want to look for Jews in the connection to the minorities treaties. But I had a feeling I would find very little. And because Jews were not utilizing the minorities treaties. So thankfully, when I got to Geneva, I looked through all the catalogs. They had very nicely cataloged by hand. Now it's online, the catalog. The documents are not online, so I still have to go to Geneva, but Geneva is a nice place to visit. But I look in the catalog, I'm going through pages after pages after pages of complaints to the League of Nations by members of different minorities. Germans, in Poland, Germans, Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, all complaining of discrimination as individuals, appealing to the League of Nations about being discriminated against according to the terms of the Minorities Treaty. And I found a grand total of 2 petitions by Jews to the League of Nations. One of them I published, the other one I have on the side. Maybe I'll publish that. And the problem with the second was that I couldn't really follow up some of the details involved in the petition. But then I said, okay, how do I explain this? And then there were other archival documents, a few, which talked about the internal workings of the League of Nations minorities section. And these documents I also published a while back. And it really opened a whole new window on this whole topic. And it started from the discussions back and forth with students in the classroom, which brought me to the archives, which got me to ask new questions, and hopefully to give some new answers. And that was really kind of joy of discovery. A second joy of discovery, besides the archives, which I have to admit my friend Moshe is a lot better with sitting in the archives and discovering things. I've made my ventures into the archives on occasion. But there's also the joy of discovery of revisiting the familiar and trying to come up with new insights and questions. And one example is one of my favorite little articles, one of my ventures into Haskalah history, an article about the Yehuda Leib Gordon's kind of hymn, anthem poem, Hakitza Ami, which started in the classroom. My late teacher, Gershon Cohen, who dealt with medieval times, but one of the things he imprinted on our minds was the close reading of texts, and particularly dealing with Jewish texts, looking for the kind of biblical, rabbinic, poetic undertones and overtones, allusions, that which he did brilliantly in his edition of Sefer HaKabbalah of Avraham ibn Daoud. So I said, going with the students back and forth over this poem, in practically every class I taught, Modern Jewish History Introduction, Haskalah, this poem would come up. And I began to see a pattern of a kind of subtext in the article, and I wrote it up, and just to see if I wasn't dreaming, I gave it to the late Professor Shmuel Versis, who was the scholar of Haskalah, and he looks at it and he says, you have something here. And I said, okay, this doctor said I'm not sick, I'm standing up and I'm walking with this, and then I carried it further, and it was even published in Proof Texts, which is a kind of flagship journal of Jewish literature. But again, this joy of discovery, of looking at a text with the students, asking questions back and forth, it brought me to a new and exciting insight, looking at the familiar. And of course, there is the joy of discovery, of asking new questions and helping develop a new discipline, and that's my modest contribution to the introduction of gender studies and women's studies in issues of Polish Jewish history. It started with an invitation to take part in a conference about women in the Holocaust, which was a kind of pioneering conference way back. And they asked me to talk about Jewish women in Poland in the interwar period, leading, how does this impinge upon what happened later on in the Holocaust? And I said, okay. And then I started looking at it and I said, wait a minute, what did I get myself into? The question is there, but where are the answers? Where are the sources? And I began to develop a series of sources, trying to come up with some kind of outlook and overview of the topic, which led to further publications and further things. But as David Engel quoted me in his very eloquent opening address, said that sometimes the articles on a particular topic could be one, if that, and sometimes only a century old. Here it was 0, which was even more disturbing. So I had to sort of create the discipline myself, or add to the discipline myself. But again, it was a great feeling of joy, of discovery, and helping to develop our field. Abraham was blessed by God with everything, and I also feel very blessed. First and foremost, your wife, family, who've supported me in a career of scholarship, sometimes having to go to weird places for times, and when the kids were a little younger, dragging the kids also to various places for sabbaticals. But it's provided me with a kind of safe haven and support, which has been so crucial to the kind of peace of mind which is needed. That's also part of the blessing. And another source of blessing has been in my dear colleagues here at Bar-Ilan, which has been my home for 36 years. It's hard to keep that number, keeps bothering me, but it was indeed 36 years here at Bar-Ilan after the 7 years in New York at JTS. And they've been a constant source of friendship, of dialogue, of support. The numerous, as we call them in Hebrew, sichot prosdor, discussions in the hall that could sometimes develop into an article or a lecture or both, just from discussion or going into each other's offices. It's been a very special source of friendship and support over the years. And the larger group of colleagues and friends who are here, some of my oldest friends like Shaul, who we met back in 1974 in the reading room of the National Library when he pestered me to go to Mincha. And here, many more years later, he's still pestering me to go to Mincha. I go, but he doesn't pester me, but it's part of his nature. But beyond the going to Mincha, there's been a kind of sharing that we have that's been special. The things that I write, the things he writes, we get a first reader's rights to see what's going on, and I have benefited from that, and I think he has as well. And my other colleagues here in the room, people who I've known for decades already, who have been a source of inspiration, of help and support, and ideas. And I've heard so many of them here today. And even among my colleagues, of course, there's some of my dear students. Some of them members of the faculty here at Bar-Ilan, some of them members of faculty in other places. I can't, if I can use a Yiddish word, the nachas I get from seeing this is just unbelievable, untold feeling of satisfaction and joy to see you. And Adam mentioned that he has doctoral students, and they're my spiritual grandchildren already, and that's a real great feeling of continuity. And also the colleagues here, one of the things which really brings me joy is the fact that Polish-Jewish studies has become a really international conversation, which gives us excuses to visit each other's country, of course, but beyond that, it's something which 40 plus years back, I don't think I could have dreamed of. And it gives me great joy to see that. Several people have mentioned here the notion of twins, of Moshe and me, twins and partners. And the people who have said that really don't even know what they've said. Because there's me, and there's my twin, my partner, my friend, colleague, Moshe, and we've certainly shared much more than an office. We've shared our lives, times good and bad, that thankfully we're here to celebrate this occasion. I've mentioned on a few occasions that one of my great zechuyot, as we say in Hebrew, one of my great merit points is that I actually taught Moshe his first class in Polish Jewish history back in around 1975. I was a very young, green, beginning lecturer. And as I've said to him on many occasions, we've spent the 45 plus years since trying to correct and expand and modify what I taught at that time, each in his own way, each in his own field of research. But that is a special thing. That relationship between us goes way back to then, but certainly all these years at Bar-Ilan when we shared much more than an office. And it's just wonderful to have him as a partner and a colleague. Words fail me to say what that relationship has meant to me. Just one story, say, about us being twins. One time, many years ago, Moshe had to go to a meeting in Europe. And he asked me to substitute for him. So of course I did, since we're interchangeable anyway. You know, the people would say, you know, the two Americans who study Poland, you know them. He said that, you know, you got to know Americans. But this particular time, Moshe went to Europe for a meeting and substituted in his class. And I finished the class. I go into the department office, and I go into a side room, and a student walks in and asks the secretary, says, is Rossman going to teach his class today? And the secretary says, no, he can't, he's away. And another student says, this is, by the way, was in March, not in October, this was March. Another student says, what do you mean? He just taught his class right now. So we're totally interchangeable. This really happened. It was a memorable moment. But it says, you know, how close we are. And I won't go beyond that other than to thank you for many years, and also you're a real inspiration to me. Your perseverance in the light of difficult issues that you're still dealing with, your productivity, your creativity and originality are really a source of inspiration for me personally, I think for everyone here in this room. But again, a little bit about the professional side, and that is my joy about where the field is, and I hope to point where the field is going and should be going. One of the things I can say with gladness is that we have an address, or addresses, I should say, and that's in the journals that we see here being published in Poland, in the States, and here in Israel, devoted to Polish Jewish studies. The ones in Poland, several devoted to general Jewish studies journals, but certainly have a big element of issues about Polish Jewry. And here, you know, we're a moment of transition for Moshe and I, and you know, what next? So of course our research goes on, but we do have projects, and one project which I have taken upon myself is to be the editor of Gal-Ed, which is the veteran journal here, 1973. I have a difficult task in doing that, not only because it's difficult, but to follow in the footsteps of my dear colleague David Engel, who fulfilled that role for 20 years?
31.
31! See, I was minimizing it. 31 years, and he was a witness to the transition that he spoke about so eloquently the first night of the conference. So I'll do my best to continue the tradition and the high standards that you have set. Which means, of course, that everyone in this room is going to be pestered by me for articles. So consider yourselves already forewarned and invited to bring the fruits of your research about Polish Jewry to Gal-Ed in Hebrew or English. It's welcome. But again, this also, the nature of these journals, we have free exercise of discourse, historical thought, polemics, sometimes very strong polemics. David Engel, I remember one that he had with one author back in PolishJewish many years ago, with Lucas and with others. So polemics go on, but I think it shows the vitality and dynamism of the field. What are we about? Again, I think if I had to sum it up in a few sentences, it's making the Jews part of Poland, make Poland part of the Jews. The notions of, it's not just what is done to the Jews by regimes, by society, but Moshe brought out so brilliantly in the Lord's Jews, issues of mutuality. There is mutuality in the relationship, even between the Jews and the Lords, which in Jewish folklore was the ultimate sign of degradation on the part of the Lord to the Jews, but there were elements of mutuality, and Gershon Hundert's famous formulation of Jews and other Poles. But also, I think we can see the maturation of the field, and we can see evidence of it in many of the talks we've heard, that we're making Jewish history part of general history in the sense of using the methods and tools, whether it be big data or other things, gender issues, and other tools which are available to us to use them to the best way. And of course, I think, despite Moshe and I argued many times, you know, on the way toward how Jewish is Jewish history, I remember he came back, as he said, shocked from the issues of postmodernism, things like that. And I, in my way, I said, you know, just lie down. This phase, this faction will pass after a few years, and why are you so worked up about this? But the fact that he was so worked up about it produced some wonderful scholarship. But I am a more relaxed. Let's see what we can learn from it without being overly excited. But issues of self-awareness of who we are, questions of objectivity, and the special challenges of the present era have to be part of our awareness. And here, without being political, I have to say the special challenges and awareness of the present era, you know, my Polish colleagues in particular, some of the winds that are blowing recently in Poland regarding the historical discipline. In fact, where politics, you know, in a sense, we thought we were free of that with the end of the communist regime, but yet there seems to be winds of politics blowing around the historical discipline, and we have to be careful about that, but still maintain our standards and who we are. Now, one of the things that we talked about over the course of the day is the question of where do Jews fit into the larger picture of Poland? And as is my wont, I like to use sometimes examples from art to sort of bring out the point. There's the famous picture of Jan Matejko, Constitution of the 3rd of May, actually his last major big painting, a year and a half before he died, it was finished, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 3rd of May Constitution. And here I have to mention Moshe's, I think, noteworthy historic speech in the Constitutional Court in Warsaw. When was that?
May the 1st, 2014.
2014. So was it, you know, it was supposed to be May 3rd, but it was on Shabbat. So just like the Lord took into account the needs of the Jew for Shabbat, also the Constitutional Court. But his discussion, in a sense, what was not in the 3rd of May Constitution, really, if you look back at that text, in a sense, foreshadowed some of the things that are happening in Poland in the years subsequent. And if David Engel talked about how historiography can sometimes relate to policy or present-day needs and events, there it was unintentional, but yet, or maybe it was intentional, I don't know, but it had a lot to say about what was going on in Poland and the whole structure of Polish society and government, etc., not just in 1791, but also in 2014. And here in Matejko's version of a very important event, history of Poland, in a last-ditch attempt to preserve Polish independence with the threat of one partition already done and the threat of others, attempt to remake the regime. And it's a kind of heroic historic painting. I won't go into all the details. There have been numerous articles, books, everything trying to analyze every little bit and identify every person in this painting that it's possible to identify. But I'm interested in the corner, the bottom right corner. And if we show a magnification of the little right corner, bottom right corner, you see two Jews, two identifiable Jews, an older Jew and a younger Jew, who seem to be literally at the margin of the picture, in a sense saying they're at the margin of what's going on, and they're looking on what's going on. And there have been all kinds of learned discussions and analyses about the gesture, the hand gesture of the older Jew down below, and is he pessimistic, whereas the younger Jew is looking with anticipation. I won't go into that. Some of the discussions also border on sermonizing, so I won't indulge in it. But the larger question is, are Jews in Polish history at the margins? And when we, in our work, try to bring them to be part of the fabric, the warp and woof, if you wish, of Polish society, without saying they're important in the political realm, but they're part of the larger picture of Polish society, I think that this is one of the most important parts of our work. And here, just in short, there are all kinds of challenges and opportunities and dangers and problems, most particularly in dealing with the Holocaust period. And first of all, as we heard from Kamil and others, something that I've said many times, not detaching the Holocaust from earlier and subsequent Polish history and Polish Jewish history to really understand what's going on. And to have, I think, a more sober view of Polish-Jewish relations. I don't think that Polish-Jewish relations boils down to anti-Semitism or philo-Semitism. It's a much more complex and interesting and variegated type of relationship. And in my article about the various metaphors, I tried to deal with the fact that everyone feels that this relationship is special. And they try to come up with a name, a term, whatever for it, but we shouldn't lose track of that special relationship, which has its ups and downs, its positive and negative sides. But unfortunately, lately, we have even legal implications. I wonder if I have to consult a lawyer as I'm editing Gal Aid, if particularly any article of the Holocaust period, if I'm going to be subject to a lawsuit if I set foot in Poland for publishing something which might not be to the liking of some people in the powers that be. So we have to be on our guard, but I don't think this should stop us from fulfilling our function as historians. And this is really one of the challenges we face. And of course, in trying to look again at where the field is at, one of the things which has been one of my bête noire, I should say, in practically every forum I talk about this, the lack of people dealing with the so-called golden age of Polish Jewry. I know, and especially someone or a group of people who could combine knowledge, deep knowledge of Polish archival material with deep knowledge of rabbinic literature and rabbinic sources to try to create some kind of synthetic view of what's going on in the 16th and 17th century. Unfortunately, we don't have that. When there was an issue of Polin many years ago about Jewish religious life in Poland, I forget which volume of Polin it was, but every article dealt with the 18th or 19th century. And Antony Polonsky, in his learned introduction, filled in the blank. What was the blank? Another 200 years of history, including the Golden Age. Some of the people in this room have made wonderful strides in understanding the younger generation in interwar Poland, Kamil and others. Issues of gender and women's history still are there for us to deal with. And the question of, we heard about ego documents. a very wonderful project that Agnieszka is dealing with, the ego documents of Polish Jews, that personal history from below. And of course, we're going to have to come to terms and deal with the communist period. Jewish life, Kamil talked about it a little bit today, the 1950s, the 1960s. It's not just Kielce, and it's not just 1968. There are 22 years in between. So we should really make some effort to understand what was going on, and not just engage in a polemic about how many Jews were in the security services or not in the security services. I think there are a lot of other issues that should be dealt with, and I think I would welcome to see good things, good articles. But this is an unfinished story. Just as I plan to continue in my research, also plan through Gal-A to be a platform which you and others can publish your work and contribute to this ongoing conversation. This present conference is really eloquent testimony to the developments that I've talked about. That these international meetings may have become routine, but from my vantage point of the old guy, Baba Yamim, who's seen a lot, we should not take this for granted. It's something to treasure, to cherish, and to maintain going on to the future. So I thank you all for participating from the bottom of my heart. It's just been wonderful, and I think Moshe agrees with that. It's just been enlightening, wonderful. Seeing people agree with us but also disagree with us, build on our work, look in new directions, ask new questions. It's just been terrific. Thank you very much.